Well, we no longer have to guess what Artie Stars is thinking and which direction he's going to take the company. He told us himself. That's what we're going to talk about today, as we got what I think is, finally a long-awaited interview and some insight into the new CEO of Harley-Davidson. And during this interview, he said something very interesting, something that every single rider that I know of has been calling the motor company out for years, especially over the past 5 years. Now, we have no idea where this is going to go from here, but what I can tell you is what I appreciate is he didn't sugarcoat it. He certainly didn't back away from it. This isn't some corporate guy speak that tried to make everything sound nice and great again. He recognized one of the biggest issues facing Harley. Not only one of the biggest issues facing Harley, really one of the biggest issues they've had over the past 5 years that we've consistently pointed out. And so today I want to talk about it, but not only what that issue is, not only what the CEO said about it, but where they go from here to correct it. I'll give you my opinions along the way. Of course, I want to hear yours, whatever those might be. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So this interview actually came from the YouTube channel Garage Composites. So I'll leave a link to that down below. But essentially, Artie had Bill Davidson there with him, who has been instrumental in kind of filling him in, right, on things that Artie Stars doesn't know about when it comes to motorcycles, because he flat out admitted, look, I can't pretend that I've been riding motorcycles for 30 years. I haven't. So acknowledging that I thought was pretty important, but he said something towards the end of the interview that I think was even more profound, something that we've talked about a lot here. But let's talk about where all of this fell apart, because it essentially started in 2021 under Jochen Zeitz. And this issue started with Hardwire. This was a very simple, but eventually destructive plan going forward for Harley-Davidson, because what they said is essentially, we're going to focus on the bikes that make us the most amount of money. We're not so much concerned with volume anymore. We are concerned with profit margins. Now, that's not the only thing they said, right? They focused on having bikes like the Pan America, which is actually a really interesting part of this interview that I watched. But they also said during this whole Hardwire phase that we want to have profitable middleweight Harley-Davidsons. The rumor has always been that Harley loses every time they sold a Sportster, or maybe just an Iron, right? An Iron 883. Whether that's true or not, the whole point was, yeah, they wanted to reach new customers, but only if it was profitable. This is a huge part of what we'll be talking about going forward. But this was also one of those detrimental lines in their Hardwire plan that on the surface just seems totally harmless. Hey, we want to make sure that we're profitable. Well, every company wants to do that, so we get that. But everything was focused towards profit. They wanted to be leaders in the EV market. I don't know if you've ever seen the sales for Livewire and their other electric bikes. It ain't great. It certainly isn't Harley. Of course, growth beyond the bikes, so merchandising and HFDS and parts and accessories, right? So these are kind of normal things you would think a business wants to focus on. But one of the biggest things is profit margins. We get rid of the lower margin motorcycles completely, and we are focusing on the ones that make us money to become the premium brand. Now, I'm sorry, not really sorry actually, this is different than a shoe company, right? Where you could take Puma, which is kind of known as, maybe a basic shoe. I don't know anything about shoes, but whatever. I know that their idea was, hey, we turn this into a premium brand. Jochen Zeitz was able to do that. Here's the problem though, with the Hardwire plan, it essentially said, I don't know my customers. And customers responded to this. And here's the thing, for a while, it looked like a brilliant plan, because Harley was actually making more money, although their overall sales were dropping, right? If you make $8,000 on a bike instead of $5,000, you remove the low margin, entry level bikes and all that kind of stuff. Well, like I said, for a while, it looked great. But here's the thing too, right? If your company is going through a period where you're not doing so great, it may seem like a smarter idea to focus on the things that are making your company money and leave the other things behind potentially. But essentially, when it comes to motorcycling, like one of the biggest things they said in this interview, you have emotion tied to the brand. And that emotion equates to essentially rungs in a ladder that were completely stripped. So now you expected riders just coming in, maybe fresh out of the riding academy, to jump to what was back then, a $12,000 or $13,000 Nightster, or then a $15,000 Softail, or a $20,000 Heritage or a Lowrider ST, or even higher to a $28,000 touring bike. If the only option I had, and I'll tell you a personal story, when I came back into riding in 2017, if the only option I had from Harley-Davidson was a $13,000 motorcycle, my first bike, after 10 years of not riding, my first bike would have not been a Harley-Davidson. Not because I didn't want one, because I simply couldn't afford it at that time. I had a very strict budget, and the Iron 883 and the Street Series were the only considerations that I could have at that time, because that's what my budget allowed. Now, off of that one motorcycle, we launched this channel, we built this community. I've had the Street Glide, the 2020 Road Glide, the Lowrider ST, and the 2024 Road Glide. I've moved my way up this Harley-Davidson ladder. I got enough gear and Harley-Davidson merchandise, for a small country, right? And so all of this is part of the ecosystem. Now, that doesn't mean that every rider that buys into Harley-Davidson will be totally dedicated to the brand, right off the rip, but a lot of them will. But if you remove essentially the thing that allows them to get into your business, because it's not making as much money right off the rip, you're just depending on all of your riders that have a little bit more expendable income. And look, we don't live forever. And so now you've created this short-term, maybe reasonable on paper idea and strategy that backfired very quickly. And it probably happened at the best time for the whole DEI controversy and all this kind of stuff, because I don't know how much longer the company could have survived under this, we're the premium touring motorcycle brand now, strategy. That's where the CEO's comments come in. And he essentially compared this to like the M series with BMW, right? You have the 3, the 5, the 7. Well, if BMW were to get rid of the 3 and then push the 5, that would be the starting point. But really what they want to do is push the 7. Well, okay, that looks better. You're making more money per vehicle sale. But you're removing that really important rung from the ladder, which is the 3 Series, which may not make you as much money. Okay, fine. But that gets people dedicated to the brand. If they really like that M Series, the next natural progression might be the 5 or the 7 Series, right? So they circumvented, or they tried to circumvent, this whole series of motorcycles that is so vitally important. And you'll notice what every other manufacturer did in the process. They filled the gap, right? So Kawasaki, Honda, Indian, any of the other ones, they still kept those bikes in their lineup. They didn't follow this plan because they understood that this is the ecosystem where you start. Now, it wasn't just the Sportster, it wasn't just the Street Series, it wasn't just the 48, right? But even like a basic electric glide, right? So some people don't want to go all the way full touring, and not because they don't want to, because maybe their funds don't allow for them to do that, right? So same thing, they removed one of those rungs off the ladder. Oh, you want to go from Softail? You have to go to the Road Glide, the Street Glide. Now, I'm not saying these new 24, 25, 26 models, right? The redesigned bikes are fantastic, but not everybody is ready for those right off the rip. And so we saw where Harley was more profitable early on, then their sales started to dip, then their overall units started to decline, and we've seen essentially from outside controversies to inside controversies to the position the motor company was taking, none of it worked out. And Harley-Davidson is different, right? We've talked about this time and time again. You're not just selling a motorcycle from a company, right? Somebody could probably buy a Honda Rebel and be just as satisfied. Maybe they get a better bike, I don't know, compared to a Sportster, whatever. Harley, though, there's the identity, the heritage. My so-and-so rode one of these. Man, this is a blank canvas. I can do whatever I want to with this motorcycle. I can work on it, the sound, the trade-ins, the service, the apparel, the whatever. You are selling much more than a Sportster when you move those motorcycles. motorcycles. Whether consciously or subconsciously, riders have it somewhere when they pick out a Harley-Davidson. It's like, man, this means something to them. This isn't just a beginner bike. This is like the beginner bike. Like, I know when I first started back in 2017, really, it had to be a Harley-Davidson. Why? Well, my grandfather rode them, and I love the sound and the look of these bikes. Simple as that. I think it'd be really interesting to poll CVO owners and see which bikes in their lineup they actually started on. Because I'm sure the vast majority of them didn't say, oh yeah, I started on a Road Glide. Started on maybe a Sportster or a Softail, whatever. The other thing that Artie Starr said in this interview that I thought was very interesting was the Pan America. Now, Pan America is a fantastic motorcycle, but he was talking about the way Pan America was positioned and marketed. It was marketed as, hey, Harley-Davidson can make these kinds of bikes too. These adventure, touring, dual sport, motorcycles. We can do this too. Instead of building their own identity and own emotion to this bike. Now, it's a little bit harder. I get that, because building the emotion with cruisers, Softails, touring bikes for Harley, that's a part of their DNA. But racing and off-road is also a part of Harley-Davidson's DNA, part of which won us World War II. So you can't forget that, but they're so far removed from that off-road racing heritage, or they were, for such a long time, people didn't think about them like that. They thought about the rallies and the biker bars and things like that. But that doesn't mean they couldn't tie that back in to their heritage and to the emotion and the emotional pull that people have with a brand like Harley-Davidson. So in his own words, essentially, they're going to reposition that bike and create marketing that actually has emotion tied to it, not just, oh, Harley has one of these as well, or that we can make this bike, but tying it back to the why and what the bike really is and what it has to offer. And here's why you absolutely need these motorcycles. Because people can go and buy a used Dyna or a used Sportster or a used whatever, okay? But if you have to go used to buy the most cost-effective Harley, the brand will suffer. The dealer may not get the sale. The financing department certainly won't get any of it. You don't get people in the dealerships, which is massive for Harley-Davidson and any motorcycle company, I think. Because here's one of the single biggest things for Harley-Davidson: community, other riders, connecting with those people. And if they never step foot in a dealer, if they never get the bike night experience, if they never come to one of your events, if they don't meet other riders, maybe they just kind of fall out of it. So it's not about grabbing them one time and getting as much money as you can. It's about keeping them there, showing them what Harley-Davidson has to offer. This is just one piece of the puzzle, and it's hard to learn who somebody is from one interview. But one thing I will say is at least he didn't back away from it. At least he didn't try to sugarcoat it. He said straight up, this was a big mistake for us, and we're not looking to repeat that mistake. I cannot wait to see the Sportster and the Sprint and some of these other offerings finally hit the dealers again, because it's going to help them out in a tremendous way, I think. That's just my opinion, though. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.